Hello, I'm Zig Ziglar. More people are engaged in the time-honored profession of selling than in any other profession in the world. More than ever before, people are hitting the streets every day, selling everything from airplanes to avocados. Some of you have been selling up a storm for years, while others are just starting out. Regardless of where you are in your career, the ingredients of successful selling remain the same, and properly understood can only enhance your skills, knowledge, and performance in the world of sales. As I see it, there are 5 ingredients of successful selling. There's prospecting, identifying who can and will buy, presentation, knowing your product and effectively being able to tell and show customers why they should buy it. Closing, coming away from the presentation with that order in your hand. Follow-up, servicing the account by maintaining contact with your customer. And number 5, which I consider to be the most important ingredient, is positive self-image. It is the base in which all the other ingredients are grounded. If you really feel good about yourself in your private or professional life, if you have a good positive self-image, you will have taken a giant step towards getting the things you want in life. But please remember that you must be before you can do, and you must do before you can have. Just for a minute, let's play a little game. It's early in the morning in your home and the telephone rings. You enthusiastically pick it up as you always do and you say, "Good morning, it's a great day to be alive and to get out and go get 'em." Well, the voice at the other end says, "Hey partner, I'm glad you're feeling so good. And time I get through talking with you, you're going to feel even better. Because I've intended to call you for a long time, and I apologize for not doing sooner. Just wanted to tell you this, that I think you're one of the nicest guys I've ever seen. You're an asset to your community. You're a credit to your profession. You're the kind of person I really enjoy spending time with and around. You know, every time I'm with you, I'm inspired, I'm enthused, I'm motivated. Man, if I could spend 10 minutes a day with you, I'd turn this world upside down." No, now, don't worry. I'm not calling you to borrow any money. I really just wanted to say those things to you. Look forward to the time I can see you again, and I'll talk to you soon. And with that, he hangs up. Now, let me ask you a question. If you had ever gotten a phone call like that, or if you should get one in the next few days, let me ask you, what kind of a day would you have? Huh? What kind of day would you have? If you were a salesperson, would you have a super day? If you were baking a cake, would you bake a better cake? Would you be a better teacher? Would you be a better doctor? Would you conduct a better sales training session? Would you be better at whatever you do? How many of you believe you'd be better doing whatever it is that you do? Now, how much more would you know about being a doctor, or making a sales call, or conducting a sales meeting, or baking a cake? How much more would you know? You wouldn't know any more, would you? But you'd be better. Because all of a sudden your image has changed. Why, I'm an asset to my community. I'm a credit to my profession. That old boy said so, and he is one more smart cookie. I mean, you wouldn't argue with him at all, would you? Now, everybody I've ever talked with agrees that your self-image is important. But what we're going to do now, we're going to look at some very specific steps which you can take to make absolutely certain that your image is good and getting better. That's important because you cannot consistently perform in a manner which is inconsistent with the way you see yourself. So how do you build a good, healthy self-image? Number 1 is you take inventory. You take a physical inventory. For example, many insurance companies will insure certain parts of your body. They guarantee if you lose an eye, they'll give you X number of dollars. If you break a leg or lose a leg, they'll give you X number of dollars. But let me ask you a question. How much would you take for an arm, for a leg, for an ear, for an eye, for any part of your body? When you begin to analyze it, I have seen where juries and insurance companies have literally paid millions of dollars for eyes and for legs and for broken backs and all of those things. So when you analyze it physically, you are worth millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. You are important. Mentally, let's take a little inventory about you. You see, if they were to try to duplicate your brain with a computer, Experts have estimated that it would take a building the size of an Empire State Building to house it, that it would literally cost in excess of $100 million, maybe $1 billion or $10 billion. And even with all of that expenditure, it still could not do what you instantly do on an everyday basis, and that is originate a thought. I love what Ethel Waters said at a Billy Graham crusade in London, England. Somebody asked her, how did she account for the fact that Billy Graham brought in so many people to hear him preach? And Ethel Waters, as only Ethel Waters could, with that big, beautiful grin, said, honey, God don't make no junk. And what I want to say is when you analyze the you, when you analyze an inventory physically, mentally, and spiritually, you are somebody. And that ought to make you feel good. Step number 2 to build that image is you need to make up and dress up and go up. I don't know what happens, but every Thursday my wife goes to the beauty shop. Now, the beautician arranges or rearranges a few strands of hair on her head. And as a good friend of ours says, when that wife of mine comes home, she is walking proud. I mean, she just is spiffy, she feels better, she acts better, she likes herself better. How many of you ladies know exactly what I'm talking about? When you dress up, you feel better. In test after test after test, they have proved beyond any doubt that students perform better in school. They're more orderly, they're more mannerly. They have proved that salespeople in stores and on call sell better when they are dressed up properly, and the ladies are made up, and the guys, have their appropriate dress on for themselves. They feel better. How many of you have experienced that? So step number 2, if you want to improve your image, you make up and you dress up and you go up. Then the third thing you need to do is you need to read some exciting stories. I challenge anybody to read the story of Eartha White, for example, the daughter of an ex-slave from Jacksonville, Florida, who at a time when racial prejudice was 100%, just about it, all over our land, but most especially in the South, Eartha White accumulated a fortune of many millions and millions and millions of dollars under the most difficult of all circumstances and used it for the betterment of mankind. You cannot read inspiring stories like that and not realize that you, being a part of mankind, can share in things like that. So read those stories on a regular basis, the biographies, the autobiographies of those people who overcame those handicaps. And then, of course, you need to listen to speakers, and the truth is that's exactly what you're doing. Listen to teachers, listen to preachers, listen to people who have something to say, who will give you a lift and make you feel better about yourself. Then the next step you can take is remember, you oftentimes need to walk before you can run. A high jumper who can jump 6 feet is not going to go out on the first day or the first jump he takes and say, set it at 6 feet, that's as high as I can go. He'll put it a little lower, and his confidence builds as he goes up. When we teach our children to become cooks and really do things around the house, we don't move them from oatmeal cookies to baked Alaska, do we? We move them one short step at a time. You don't go from 2 times 2 to 28,961 times 49,368. But you take some steps along the way there, and every step gives you that extra amount of confidence. As a sales manager, occasionally some of our people used to get in a little slump from now and then, from time to time. We've all seen it happen. And what we would do is encourage them to take the lowest priced product we had, a small item with a low ticket value, and simply go make a few sales there. That got the momentum going, and then we would move them up to the next one, and the first thing you know, they are really doing well. The next step is you need to join the Smile and Compliment Club. Now, I want to emphasize a point. I believe with all my heart, my philosophy has been for a long time, that you can have everything in life you want if you will just help enough other people get what they want. And when I talk about the Smile and Compliment Club, I mean simply that if you will look at people and smile, and if you will compliment them on some specific observable behavior, now that is a key there, then they're going to feel better. And you know, the interesting thing is when they feel better, they'll grin all over, and in most cases they will just thank you profusely. They'll feel better, but you know what? You're going to feel even better than they will. Now, remember a moment ago I said you can have everything in life you want if you'll just have enough other people get what they want? You need to take that and apply it not as a tactic, but as a philosophy in life. For example, if you will start doing some things for somebody who can do absolutely nothing in return for you. I'm talking about visiting a shut-in. I'm talking about reading a book into the microphone for the blind. I'm talking about taking some food or clothing to someone whom you know is in need, and not just at Christmas and not just at Thanksgiving, but when you do something for somebody else, there's nothing on this earth that makes you feel as good as that does. It really builds that image. Now you need to be careful of whom you associate with if you want your image to really grow. You know, the right people really can give you a lift and make you feel good about yourself. And the wrong people can literally pull you down and make you feel less about yourself. You're influenced by the people you're around. There's no question about that. For example, you probably have noticed this. You can take a southern boy or girl and bring them up north or send them out west, and it's just a question of time before they acquire an accent. I figured you had, had noticed that. Or you can take a northern boy or girl and send them down south, and pretty soon we'll have them talking normally. You see, you really are influenced by the people who are around you. How many of you seriously have noticed that in your experiences? It absolutely does happen. To build your image, you need to list your positive qualities. Now, I want you to think with me on this one just for a moment. The truth is you have an incredible number of them, and they can be developed and extended even further. You see, you can be just as honest as anybody. You can have just as much character as anybody. You can develop just as much positive mental attitude as anybody, just as much enthusiasm. You can be just as dependable, just as sincere, just as helpful. You can be just as studious, work just as hard, be just as reliable, be just as punctual. And when you start listing all of those qualities, let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the qualities that will get you a job anywhere, at any time, under any circumstances. You put them all together and you begin to feel good about yourself. To build a good, healthy self-image, you need to list your past successes. You see, there isn't a one of you, if you really think about it, who hasn't done many, many things about which you ought to feel good about your successes. Maybe you've lost 20 pounds. Maybe you've made friends with an old grouch that nobody could get along with. Maybe you passed a course which was particularly tough. Maybe you made a sale in an area or became number one in an area which was already sold out. How many of you have seen that happen in the world of sales so many times? When you start analyzing all of the things, what you're doing is you are emphasizing the positive. And when you begin to emphasize the positive, that image begins to grow. Self-acceptance is what I'm talking about. Now, how do you improve your self-image? Maybe change your physical appearance will make a difference. For example, a person who's overweight, if they will lose some weight, that will make a difference. For over 24 years of my adult life, by choice, I weighed well over 200 pounds. I say by choice because, you see, I've never accidentally eaten anything. And when you choose to eat too much today, you have chosen to weigh too much tomorrow. Well, 15 years ago, I got involved in diet and exercise, and I lost 37 pounds, and I've kept it off. And I really do feel better about myself. Sometimes a change in appearance will make a difference. Yes, the top professionals in the world of selling really have worked on their self-image. That's so important. Because you see, 73% of all sales interviews end with no attempt to close because the salesperson has that fear of rejection. They don't understand that it really is not a rejection personally. It's simply a business refusal. Now, when your image is solid and you believe in what you're selling, you move confidently towards closing the sale. So I really encourage you to get busy in this area of building a good, healthy self-image. There's one very important thing I'd like you to remember about building a positive self-image. Nobody on the face of this earth can make you feel inferior without your permission. When you refuse to give others that permission, you will start accepting yourself. And once you accept yourself, you will have removed a significant barrier to the growth and success you're capable of attaining. Now, do me and you just one little favor. Stop the tape, then sit back and close your eyes. Just relax for about 5 minutes and picture yourself already possessing that healthy self-image and all the other things necessary for your success. Remember, it must happen in your mind before it will happen in your life. Pretty exciting, isn't it? Now, let's review self-image. In the world of selling, the top professionals make prospecting their #1 priority. Now, why is that? Well, it's very simple. Every facet of selling depends upon the prospecting, our economic stability of the sales individual and their company. Prospecting is acquiring the name of an individual who is financially and authoritatively qualified to make a decision on my product and service. You see, if they're not qualified to make a decision, then you really don't have a prospect, do you? What you have is a suspect. Now, this is true in the world of selling, whether I'm in computers or whether I'm selling real estate or automobiles or whether I'm selling boats. Prospecting, ladies and gentlemen, though, is kind of like mining gold. When you go in a gold mine, you're going to move around a lot of dirt before you find the nugget. And a lot of times in prospects, you've got to do a lot of prospecting. You've got to talk to a lot of people in order to find a prospect instead of that suspect. Now, when and where do we prospect? Well, I'm absolutely convinced that we've got to always be thinking prospecting. We need to get up in the morning, and if our mate says, "What'll you have for breakfast?" I think I'll take a prospect. At lunch, if somebody says, "Well, what you going to have for lunch?" I think I'll take 2 prospects. At dinner, "What you going to have for dinner?" I think I'll have 3 prospects. We really need to be thinking prospects wherever you are, because prospects literally are everywhere. Let me share with you what I think is a fascinating little story. Maybe I think it's fascinating because it happened to me. But years ago, I was living in Florence, South Carolina. Now, I was working up in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I was selling hope chest items for single girls and putting on demonstrations for married couples. Well, it was Saturday evening, and I was heading back home to Florence, South Carolina, and I was flat hightailing it on down the highway. It was ridiculous how fast I was going. And then I looked up in the rearview mirror and I saw that I wasn't the only one on the highway. There was a friendly little light back there. And so I obviously stopped, and the gentleman and I had a real nice talk. As a matter of fact, I think I would have persuaded him, since we had a mutual friend, to let me go, except he had radioed ahead and told somebody else to block the highway. He said, "This dude is going to leave me if I'm not careful." So he gave me a ticket, but he did say, "I'll let you stop by in Whiteville, North Carolina on Monday on your way back up and pay your ticket." Well, when I walked in, the ticket was $30 or $40, an enormous sum of money back in 1952. And I'll tell you, when I started counting out those dollars, it just really broke my heart. And then I noticed that the young lady whom I was talking with had on an engagement ring. And so I said to her, I can't help but notice that you're wearing a diamond. She said, yes, I am. I said, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions? She said, no, go right ahead. I said, are you at this point saving any money on this job? She said, well, as a matter of fact, I am. I said, well, let me ask you, if I had something that was really nice, would you be in position, if it was something you would use the rest of your life, could you increase your savings, 25 cents a day? She said, well, I certainly could. I said, well, let me ask you this. If I had something out in the car that was really beautiful, that would fit the bill for exactly what you'll be using for the rest of your life, would you be courteous enough to spend 5 minutes looking at it? She said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm just fixing to go on break, so as a matter of fact, I would. So I said, excuse me. And a lot of folks say, excuse me, but that's wrong. I ran back out to the car, and I picked up my sample case, and I scooted back in. I made the presentation, and one of her friends, who had been married about 10 years, was there, and listening in on the presentation also. I asked the obligating question, and the young lady turned to the married lady and said, well, what would you do? Before she could answer, I said, excuse me, ma'am, let me ask you a question. I said, if you knew what you now know when you was this young lady's age, knowing all the expenses of a home and a family and insurance and house payments and all those other things, and you had the same chance that she now has, if you had known that when you were her age, would you have gotten a set of this merchandise? She said, I certainly would. So I turned to the engaged girl and I said, that's exactly what you're going to do, isn't it? She said, yes, I am. I wrote the order, and when I got through, I turned to the married lady and I said, now, ma'am, 10 years ago when you got married, you did not have this opportunity. But just because you did not have it then does not mean that you should not take advantage of it now, does it? She said, no, it doesn't. I said, then I suppose you want the same order, don't you? She said, as a matter of fact, I do. I wrote both of those sales. As I was pulling out on my way back up to Wilmington, North Carolina, I saw the highway patrolman. And for the first time in my life, I stopped a highway patrolman. Literal truth, and I thanked him for giving me the ticket. Now, what am I saying? I'm saying that prospecting is something you ought to do everywhere. Now, you really don't have to go 90 miles an hour to get them, and you certainly don't have to pay a $30 or $40 fine in order to get one, but we really need to prospect. We need to use what I also call, thanks to a good friend of mine who taught me this little lesson, he uses what he calls eagle eye prospecting. He was selling up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and he was selling training programs. And as he would ride on his way to see his prospects, every time he would pass a business that looked like it was the kind of business that could use his kind of training, he'd pick up his cassette microphone and he would dictate the name of that business and where the location was, and if there was a phone number, he would get that. Then by the time he got home, he would have anywhere from 5 to, on occasion, as many as 25 different prospects. He gave those names to his daughter, who then got on the telephone and did a general inquiry as to the nature of the business, the number of people working there, and this kind of thing. Then he did the follow-up calls after many of them had been eliminated, because really a lot of them were suspects instead of prospects, but he used it very effectively. I'll tell you another advantage of that kind of thing too. It got his family involved. And that's one of the nice things about selling. You can put the family to work and they're functioning as a team. And when they're functioning as a team, then the family will be closer and they also will be more profitable in the world of selling. Now, here are a couple of other quick ways to acquire prospects. From the advertisements in the Yellow Pages, for example, newspapers and magazines, from lists available at the Better Business Bureau, and an amazing number of people do not even know that those things are available. The Chamber of Commerce, you can get them through direct mail advertising or at your local library. Now, this is another one that people often overlook, but you can pick up a copy of Contacts Influential, which lists the names of organizations by street address and includes their CEOs. This information, ladies and gentlemen, I can absolutely guarantee is truly important. Now, when you're doing cold calling or eagle eye prospecting, when it takes you and gives you the chance to get the name, then refer them through this source to check out on them, you really do have something going for you. Because every business on the street, as well as the businesses that you have called by number, will be listed in these books. And so you can have some additional information. Then there's another which really is an expansion of something we've already talked about. It's what I call the COD method of prospecting. By C, I mean communication. We need to communicate with everybody exactly the business we're in and what we're doing. As a friend of mine, Calvert Roberts, says, you got to circulate in order to percolate. And then the O stands for observation. You simply need to observe the needs which are there. You need to observe whatever your product is. We become tuned in. If we really are in the business we're in, we become tuned in to the people who have the needs. I'm certain you've all noticed this. When you buy a particular car which you have never bought before, all of a sudden everybody on the streets driving the same kind of car you're now driving. They're in the parking lot, they're in the garages, they're on the streets, they're on the highways. Now what am I saying? I'm saying become aware and observe, and you'll see a lot of prospects. The D stands for dedication. You know, folks, dedication and commitment is so important in what we're doing. Then, of course, there's the well-known radiation prospecting, where you have a center of influence. Now, when you use a center of influence very much, you need to be careful on that one. And the reason I say that is after a period of time when you've used a center of influence and they give you prospects, a lot of times you begin to run down because a lot of times they recommend down. Now, in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about another method where you do not have them running down, but you just need to be aware of the fact that if your prospects begin to deteriorate, be aware of the fact that you might need to expand in an entirely other area and get a new center of influence, is what I am saying. Now, who's the ideal prospect for you? Well, I believe you are your ideal prospect. Now, what do I mean by that? I think you ought to be buying from yourself. With the exception of 747s, and I don't necessarily think if you sell them that you got to buy one, but if you're selling Ford automobiles, you ought to be driving a Ford. If you're selling Chevrolets, you ought to be driving a Chevrolet. In other words, your commitment, your belief in what you're selling ought to be so strong that you absolutely are using it. When we're selling, regardless of who it is we're selling to, we need to keep the interest of the other person in mind, because people do not buy to help us. They do not buy, because of our interest. They buy because they see it as a solution to their problem. They buy because they're sold on it. Always think in terms of the prospect's interest. Now remember that the best source sometimes of prospects is the best source. Now what do I mean by that? And this will kind of stray a little from what I said a little bit earlier, but all I was trying to do early is caution you about being careful if the quality of your prospects start to go down. I want to emphasize that as long as your center of influence is giving you super prospects, you keep going back to that center of influence. Again, when I was in direct sales, we put on the dinner cooking demonstrations. Had one lady who gave me 11 dinner demonstrations, and all 11 of them were enormously successful. Now let me tell you why she gave them. She was so enthusiastic about their product, that's number one. She saw it as her doing a real favor to her friends. And then number three, she had a lot of friends who did not know each other. She used it as a social event. She really felt that she was doing them a big favor. Where do you get your prospects? One of my good friends who used to live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, told me of a rather unique club. I encourage you, if there's not one in your locality, to start this particular club. It was literally a lead exchange club. That was the name of it. And you restrict them to a small number of professional salespeople, 15 to 20. One morning a week they get together for breakfast. And the admission for the breakfast is each person brings in 5 prospects whom we consider to be good prospects. Well, now if you've got 15 people there and then 14 of the others bring you 5 prospects, we're talking about 70 people. Now, obviously, some of them will just be suspects for the product you sell. But you can quickly narrow them down, and out of 70, if you eliminate, through your associates and mailing and so forth, if you eliminate 90% of them, you've still got 7 brand new prospects to buy what you're selling. Now, this example simply illustrates that you look for new leads wherever you are. But you don't forget the old customers, because this is the way you grow in the business. You grow the account. When we get a new product, or you get a new product, or an option to go with what you already have, you can turn to that old customer into a new one. And then, of course, there's the familiar referral prospecting. And so many people do not really know how to ask for prospects. I have been on sales calls training a new salesperson, or training a salesperson, or working with an established one, and when they finished their presentation, whether they did or did not sell, they would say, now I'd like you to give me the names of 5 of your friends. And they would put 5 cards in front of them. Well, let me tell you something. In most cases, that will absolutely frighten them. They cannot instantly think of 5 people, and so a lot of times they stall. And they're kind of stunned and say, well, I don't know of anybody. Then you simply don't want to use that method, because that's not effective. What you do is this. You take out 1 card and just hold it in your hand. And you say, Mr. Prospect, let me ask you a question. If your best friend were to come by here right now and walk into this office, would you introduce him to me? What do you think he's going to say? Well, of course I would. Obviously I would. Let me ask you to do this, and he probably is not going to come by. I would like to get you to introduce me to him in another way. If you will, just give me his name and address, and I'd like to share with him what I have shared with you. And it'll be so helpful if you will just take your business card and on the back of it write, Charlie, this guy is worth talking to, or this lady really has something you'd be interested in. Get the lead in that way. Now, in most cases, you've got to be specific when you start prospecting. Do you have somebody who's in Rotary with you that would be interested or be a prospect for what we're doing? Or better still, do you have somebody that you play golf or bridge with who has the same needs? You see, a lot of times they try to do too much screening for you if you emphasize the interest. But when you talk about the needs, that is a different thing. Remind them of people they go to church with, somebody they're on the school board with, somebody who lives in the neighborhood, somebody they jog with or play tennis with, somebody they're in the bridge club with. Jog their memories is what I'm saying there. Now, when you get the reference there, if you can possibly do so for some of them, if you can get the prospect to give that prospect they've just given you a phone call, they call the prospect and say, you know, I'm excited about something, and I'm not going to try to tell you what it's all about, but I just talked with a fella or a lady that you're going to be interested in talking with. Have them open the door. Now, if they're reluctant to doing something like this, then you say to them, well, let me ask you a question. If you don't want to, sometimes they'll infer they don't want to, put their friends, they want to put them on a list, so to speak. Then you get right down to the nitty-gritty, you ask them a question. Well, let me ask you, are you upset because your friend sent me to see you? Or do you actually appreciate the fact that they sent me because now we've solved a real problem which you had? Now, a lot of times what you can do is you can use the prospecting as a trial close. In other words, as you get down to the close of the sale, you can say, incidentally, One of the things we use is the radiation method, because if this concept is spread, whatever it is you're selling, if this product is spread, then everybody will be better off. So if you don't mind, let me get you number one to jot down the name of your closest friend. And while you're doing that, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions to complete the form. And then you can use it in conjunction with the close. Now, when you start prospecting, remember that a suspect is just a name on a card. But a prospect, when you start identifying them, is someone who has a need for what you're selling. They have a desire for what you're selling. They have the money to buy what you're selling. And they have the authority to go ahead and make the decision. Now, that's important, because McGraw-Hill very recently did a substantial study. And here's what they discovered. It cost $178 to make a sales call in America today, an average of many companies. Now, that includes salary, airfare, hotel bills, expenses, insurance, the whole thing. And it takes 5 2/10 sales calls to make the sale. Now, what I'm talking about is you've got $900 tied up in that sale, but $178 in the call. You cannot financially afford to be calling on suspects. They've got to be qualified prospects. To emphasize this particular point, I have a good friend who also sells training. And this particular friend of mine sells it by putting on a free training session. The only qualification he imposes upon the management there is that the person who makes the decision must be present. Now, over the years, when the decision maker is present, his closing percentage, and it's a high-ticket item, is 45%. If the decision maker is called out of town or skips out on the meeting, then his closing percentage is 8%. Despite the fact that they always assure them, oh, the boss will take my recommendation, or the decision maker relies on us, you go ahead and put the training session on. But let me tell you one of the most basic things in selling, ladies and gentlemen, and if you'll hear this, it'll make a difference in your sales career. There's a vast difference in understanding something well enough to buy it, as versus understanding it well enough to sell it. So that person who attended the training session might have been enthused, but it's a 2-hour training session. And actually, when he goes in to tell the decision maker all of the facets, the major thing he will remember is the price. And despite the fact that the people were enthused about it, the closing ratio is only 8% if the decision maker is not there. I think you now understand how important it is to distinguish between suspects and qualified prospects. It is widely held that a qualified prospect is 5 times more likely to close than an unqualified suspect. It is therefore obvious that you stand a far better chance of making a sale with a qualified prospect instead of wasting your time and money chasing after unqualified suspects. Now, let's review prospecting. Most people don't plan to fail, they really don't. And yet there are a lot of failures because people fail to plan. In the world of selling, just like in the National Football League, you've got to have a game plan if you're going to be successful. Let me give an example of what I'm talking about. In the last 2 minutes of the half, and in the last 2 minutes of the game, in the National Football League, they score more points than they do at any other 30% of the entire game. That means they're scoring over 4 times as fast in those 2 minutes before the half and 2 minutes before the end of the game. Now, why is that? I'm absolutely convinced it is because they have such a finely honed game plan. They've got it down, as we'd say down home, to a gnat's eyelash. I mean, everybody is really precise in all of their assignments. It's the hurry-up offense. And in addition to that, in addition to having the plan itself, they fully expect to score. In the world of selling, you see, you've got to have a game plan and you've got to have the expectations of really doing something. Prospects are too valuable. They cost too much money for us to burn by not having a planned sales presentation. To waste a prospect on an unplanned sales call is downright criminal. It takes preparation. You can compensate actually for the lack of talent with plans. When we learn how to respond effectively to the prospect's questions or objections, then we will be more effective in making that sale. No plan, and you waste your time and the prospect's time in the prospect. Your customer feels very uncomfortable when you're sitting there muddling through a presentation. The unplanned presentation actually suggests that the product and the company isn't very good. On the other hand, a planned, an organized, a precise presentation gives the impression that the prospect is dealing with a professional who probably has an excellent product to go along with it. Now, the plan's content is important. What the product is and does is what we really want to emphasize. What are the benefits? How does it meet the customer's needs? Let me give you some examples. Maybe the best known one, last year in excess of 500,000 quarter-inch drills were sold. And yet nobody wanted a quarter-inch drill, did they? What they wanted was a quarter-inch hole. No lady wants a tube of paint in a, in a little container. What she wants is the color, the glamour that goes with it. Nobody wants 4 wheels and a body and upholstery and so forth. What they do want is dependable transportation. No lady wants a lot of liquid in a little bottle. What she does want is that good, sweet smell that is so devastating that she's really might be in need of an insurance policy every time she puts it on. Now, let me emphasize this. Within the frame of the presentation, the delivery itself must be very carefully planned because there's a lot of ways to say a lot of different things, but there's only one best way to say anything. Now, I know a lot of people say, now, wait a minute, Ziglar, you're not going to talk about a canned sales talk, are you, man? I can spot those dudes a mile off, Get it out of a can, Ziglar, I can tell it. Well, let me tell you something, friend. If you can spot a canned sales talk, it is because it has been improperly canned. They're canned sales talks. That's what they are. A good planned presentation will keep you right on track. And what it does is free your creative brain so that at any time you can respond to the unexpected and then go right back to the presentation. That enables you to keep on the time frame within the time limit. Because if you've told the prospect you'll be there 20 minutes and you labor for 45 minutes, your chances of making the sale are absolutely going to be diminished. The presentation is memorized, but you adapt it to your personality. When you've got that talk down, then your best qualities will shine through. And let me simply say that this also gives you flexibility, which is crucial when it comes to dealing with objections which the customer brings up. You see, as we look at objections in this context, we need to understand that objections are literally our best friends. If the prospect does not object, you can rest assured they have no interest in what you're saying. You can also say this: if there were no objections, there would be no need for you or me, the salespeople. The prospect would simply go ahead and buy. But what we need to do is understand what is the difference between a question and an objection. A question is simply something that is seeking information. How long will it take to get here? What different colors do you have? What terms can you offer? What's the service policy of the company? Those are questions. Now, an objection is a call for information also, but it shows concern and interest in what you're selling. When you're questioning or when you're being questioned or they raise an objection, you need to remember that you don't have to answer all of the objections to make the sale. Now, that's something that took me a long time as a young salesman to learn. You don't have to answer them all. For example, the suit of clothes I have on, I obviously bought it. I can assure you it was not given to me. Now, there were a couple of things I did not like about this suit. I was not enthusiastic about the price. I'll just have to lay it right out there in front. I wasn't really motivated about that. I didn't like the fact that I have to wear a belt with it, because believe it or not, after traveling nearly 4 million miles on the road, occasionally I still do forget my belt. And that was one of the things I did not like about this particular suit. But the redhead looked at it and she said, "Honey, you know, that's one of your colors." And then she rubbed it and she says, "And it feels so good. And it fits you well." Well, I'm wearing the suit. You don't have to overcome all of the objections, but what you need to understand is that when the value of the product exceeds the value of the money that the product requires, at that point, you can get in business if you ask for the sale. Now, let me emphasize a point. Most objections are the same. If you were to record all the objections you've received in your sales career, I can assure you at least 80% of them would fit under the category of about 7 or 8 pretty standard objections. In many cases, you can eliminate the objections or dramatically reduce them by changing the structure of your presentation. You need to be looking at that one pretty carefully, because if the same one keeps coming up, that can be handled in a presentation in many cases. Now, you need to remember that there are many kinds of prospects that you're going to be dealing with. The animal prospect, for example, who's going to bear it in mind. And then there's the insomniac prospect who's going to sleep on it. There's the musical prospect who'll make a note of it. And then there's the playful prospect who's just feeling out the market. I mean, we got a lot of different kinds. But remember this, all prospects have 2 basic things in common. Doesn't make any difference where you categorize them, they have 2 things in common. Number 1, they want to be right. And number 2, they want to be understood. Now, there are 4 opportunities for handling objections. The first time is before they occur. The second time is when they occur. The third time is later on in the presentation. And the fourth time is never. Now, the ideal time, as I said earlier, is before they occur. That's when the presentation is made. And then the second time is when it's appropriate. A lot of times a person will bring up an objection and you're talking about something entirely different and it's not appropriate to handle at that moment. So what you say is, "I'm delighted you asked that question. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. If I forget it, please remind me because this is important and you'll be excited with what I have to say about it." Then you go ahead with the presentation. Now, for example, if the prospect asks a question, and let's say you're demonstrating tires, and the strength of the tires, and the prospect might say to you, "I don't believe these tires are rugged enough for our use." Now, what do? Well, first of all, you hear the objection out. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, said, "He who answers a matter before he hears it is not wise." Let the prospect voice their objection. Let them get it out. Now, number 2, you need to act pleased that they brought it up. And you should be pleased because that says, hey, I'm interested. Remember that objections thrive on opposition, but they die with agreement. What do you say? I'm really glad that you raised that issue. Don't use the word objection. And you truly should be, because that says he now is a viable prospect. The number three, the third step you take, you change the objection to a question. In other words, Mr. Prospect, your question, as I understand it, is will these tires hold up under the day-to-day pounding which our city streets will give them? Is that what you're asking? You see, that way you get the customer involved, and that's so important. Then number four, what do? You use the question, objection if you will, as the reason for going ahead. And you simply say something like this. Actually, Mr. Prospect, the question you raised is the reason we do so much business in this city. Because fleet test after fleet test firmly established the fact that our super reinforced steel-belted radials with Durabrig are ideally suited for rugged city street usage. As a matter of fact, that's the very reason that XYZ Company uses our tires. And then you take step number five. You parade all of the testimonials out in front of that person, and you close the sale with the testimonials. Now, if the prospect brings up another objection after you have completed your presentation, you handle it in the same way. But if they bring up yet another objection, you respond with a question. Mr. Prospect, do you mind if I ask you a question? And then you get their answer. Most of the time they're going to obviously say, well, go ahead. Then the question is this. The only question which stands between you and a favorable decision concerning our product would be, is this the only additional objection that stands between you and a favorable decision concerning our product, or would there be something else? Now, if that's the only other question, you answer it. You assume the sale and you attempt to close. But if the prospect says, well, I'm also concerned about, and then they start bringing in a number of other things, like that. For example, when they do that, you bring out what I call a talking pad. And you begin to write them down. It's just a little yellow pad. And if they say, for example, it might be price, and so you write down price. It might be concern about the credibility of the company. It might be the guarantee. But you write these things down. And then you simply say, are these the only questions, or would there be something else which stands between you and ownership of the product? You need to find out what the problem is. Are there other questions that they have in mind? And then you take your yellow pad, you deal with those objections one at a time. And as you finish each one, you ask, is that a satisfactory answer to your question? And if they say yes, then you cross it out. Or does that clarify the issue to your satisfaction? Would be another way of putting it. Now, when you've crossed all of them out, subliminally, and think about this, subliminally, you've eliminated in the prospect's mind any reason for not owning the product, which means the chances are excellent he'll go ahead and sign the agreement. Now, the fourth time to answer an objection is never. Some objections are silly. But also, please understand this, regardless of how weird, regardless of how wild, regardless of how far out it might be, if they bring the same objection up, you must deal with it. Now, please understand that we're not in the objection answering business. I've actually been on sales calls with a lot of salespeople, and they'd answer an objection, you know, and then in essence they'd fold their hands and say, okay, I'll handle that one pretty good, just go ahead, try me with another one. Go ahead, I dare you to. Give me another one. I've seen it happen. Young salespeople would do that. They'd answer it and then challenge them to bring up another one. When you answer objection, then you close. I think you can now see how a well-developed, thought-out presentation is truly an asset to the sales professional. Many salespeople feel that memorizing their presentation will inhibit their selling. In fact, just the opposite occurs. Memorizing and really internalizing your presentation gives you the freedom to be flexible without losing track of your goal, closing the sale. Now, let's review presentation. When you get the prospect, you're on first base. When you get the appointment, you're on second. When you make the presentation, you're on third. And so far, all you've done is invest time and money, your time and money, and the prospect's time. Until you close the sale, you're going to stay on third base. So closing the sale is important. The question is, where will these procedures work that we're talking about? I want to get you to do something for me right now. I would like to get each one of you to hold up 3 fingers on your writing hand. Just stick them up in there. 3 fingers, please. Now, if you will look around, you will notice that 96% of them are these 3. Notice it. If you look a little more carefully, you'll notice that 3% of them are these 3 fingers. And if you'll look even more closely, you'll notice an oddball every once in a while can manage to put these 3 up. Now, let me get you to do something else. I want you to think of a color. Just think of a color. Now, those of you who thought of red, would you hold up your hands, please? At any given time, 60% of the audience will hold up their hands and say they chose red. Think of a flower. Now, there are hundreds of different flowers, but those of you who thought of a rose, would you hold up your hands, please? Now, 50% as a general rule will do that. Now, that's true in Auckland, New Zealand, Chicago, Illinois, and Portland, Maine, or any other place. Now, what am I saying? I'm saying that we have an awful lot of similarities. And in the world of selling, we need to concentrate on these folks, not these folks. We need to deal with the similarities. We need to deal with the largest group of people if we're going to sell. Now, if we're going to persuade other people to act in their own best interest by buying the product you are trying to sell, you need to think of what is similar about them and the other people you've dealt with. Now, that's not to say that we're not all different also, because we are. But in selling, there are some standard procedures that will work because the procedures are being applied to people who have the same basic needs and the same basic desires. So let me share with you some of the techniques for closing the sale. I'd like to share with you some of my favorites. Now, closing is the natural or normal end for the presentation. The first one I'd like to share with you has to do with a story, as they generally do. 4 years ago, we built a home 120 miles east of Dallas. That's where I go down and do my writing. It's in a beautiful area. We hit the jackpot with a lot. We got a marvelous builder. His wife is an internationally famous interior designer, and we kind of got her as part of the package. We certainly could not afford her. She does interior decorating for hotels, the monsters, the big ones, the beauties. But I'll never forget, we'd been in the home about a month. We were down there, and Bill Tennyson, the builder, and his wife, Joyce Wynn, came in, and old Bill was carrying a package. I said, "What's you got there, Bill?" He said, "Well, I got a little something for you." Joyce spoke up and said, "Yes, Zig, you know, your wall is over 30 feet high. That's the ceiling in the great room is 30 feet high." And she said, "That wall's a little blank," and she said, "We need to put this wall rug on it." Well, I did what most prospects do. I asked the price. It was not inexpensive. And so I said, "Joyce, I don't know about that." I said, "That's a lot of money." She said, "Well," said, "old Bill's already with me," and said, "He's got his ladder out there with him. Why don't we go ahead and just hang it up on the wall? You might not even like it. And if it looks good, then you can decide. If it doesn't, no harm done." Well, this old hard-headed fellow agreed that that was a logical approach to take. So I said, "Okay, hang her up and we'll see." 3 hours later, when I was out jogging, it occurred to me what she had done to me. She had used one of the most natural closes of them all. It's called the puppy dog close. If you can get the product in the hand of the prospect so they can see what it is, you got a good chance of them buying. Selling sometimes is simplicity itself. For example, the 3-question close would certainly fit in that category. A lot of times after you finish the demonstration, if you'll just ask the 3 questions, can you see where this would save you some money? Are you interested in saving money? If you were ever going to start saving money, when do you think would be the best time to start? If you're selling convenience, can you see where this would save you a lot of time and effort? Are you interested in saving time and effort? If you were ever going to start saving time and effort, when do you think would be the best time to start? A lot of times a question should make that prospect think, and if they think right, then they're going to act. For example, how many of you ever have a prospect complain about your price? They even hint that it's a little too high. Can I see your hand? So the prospect says, it's too high. You don't get in an argument with them. What you do is you lower your voice and you look them in the eye and simply say, well, you know, Mr. Prospect, many years ago, our company made a basic decision. We decided that it would be easier to explain price one time than it would be to apologize for quality forever. Now, I'll bet you're glad we made that decision, aren't you? The next little close that I'd like to share with you is something we call the cost-price close. You need to understand that the prospect needs to see and hear if it is humanly possible, because we are moved emotionally by what we hear and logically by what they see. The prospect says, well, the price is too high. And then you can simply say to them, well, let me ask you, Mr. Prospect, is it price or is it cost which you're concerned about? And many times the prospect will say, well, what's the difference? Then I share this little example. Well, Mr. Prospect, when my son was 6 years old, we went down to buy him a bicycle. We went to the Swin bicycle shop. The price was $64.95. Well, you're not going to buy a 64-year-old, you're not going to buy a 6-year-old a $65 bicycle. This was 16 years ago. And at that time, $65, that is a lot of money. So we went down to the discount store, found a neat little bicycle for just $34.95. Price, much, much better. 2 months later, we went down to get the new handlebars. Now, fortunately, it was still in warranty. It didn't cost us anything. But about a month later, we had to go back for some more new handlebars and no more warranty, so it was $4.50. About 2 months later, we went back in. The entire sprocket apparatus had completely come undone. It was destroyed. The bill was $15 and change. About a month later, the bearings in the front wheel came unzipped, and we took it back down, and it was going to be $3, $4, $5. I don't know what it was. I threw in the towel. I said, no more. Now, the price of that bicycle was $34.95. My son rode the bicycle 6 months. When you added the other factors, the sprocket repairs and the handlebars, the total was $54.45. So the cost for the bicycle is $9 a month for him to ride that bicycle for the 6 months, not counting downtime. We then went down to the Swin bicycle shop, bought the $64.95 bicycle. For the next 5 years, my son rode that bicycle every day, and for 5 more years, even though he was far too big for it, you know how kids do, they'll get a little bicycle out and play with it. He made a dirt bicycle out of it. He rode that bicycle 10 years. The price was $64.95. The cost, 10 years, $64.95, that's $6.50 a year. Let me ask you again, Mr. Prospect, is it price you're concerned about, or is it cost? You see, there are a lot of people who can beat us on price, but nobody beats us on cost. And because price is a one-time thing and cost is the lifetime investment, lifetime of the product, you're interested in the lowest possible cost, aren't you? Another close. Make sure the prospect understands what he's deciding when you make the sale. I call this one the diagram close. Several years ago, we were in the market for a new copier. The one we chose was $10,000, give a few dollars or take a few dollars. The little machine we had was long ago outdated. It was slow. It turned out poor work. Took us an awful lot of extra time. Turned out a lot of fouled up copies. We should have bought a new one 2 or 3 years earlier. We figured that we would save at least 2 hours a day in labor cost with a new machine. We do an awful lot of that kind of copying. Well, even at $5 an hour, $5 an hour, 2 hours a day, that's $10 a day. That's $50 a week. That's $2,500 a year. Now, in the diagram close, you work it like this. If the person invests the $10,000, then their bank account goes to zero, assuming that they put everything in the copier, which obviously they wouldn't do that. But if you invest the $10,000, then your bank account goes to zero, but you've got the machine. Now, 1 year later, saving the $2,500, you see, you've got $2,500 and the machine. 2 years later, you've got $5,000 and the machine. 3 years later, you've got $7,500. Does everybody see where I'm getting these figures? No problem understanding it, okay? $7,500 and the machine. 4 years later, you got $10,000 back and you got your machine. Now, if the prospect does not invest, then he's got that full $10,000, but no machine. A year later, he's only got $7,500 and no machine. 2 years later, he's only got $5,000 and no machine. 3 years later, he's only got $2,500 and no machine. And 4 years later, he's got no money and no machine. So, Mr. Prospect, you see, you're not deciding, do I invest the money for the machine or don't I invest the money? What you are deciding is, 4 years from now, do I want $10,000 and the machine, or do I want to have no money and no machine? What is your decision, Mr. Prospect? Next thing I'd like to share with you is you need to understand that you must not let your ego cost you the sale. Have you ever been in a situation where you've answered several objections, you know, the prospect to bring them up? You would handle them very effectively, you know. And finally, the prospect, half in admiration, half in disgust, half in sarcasm and cynicism, would say to you, well, I got to hand it to you. You're really a professional. It doesn't make any difference what I bring up. You've got an answer for everything. Now, at that point, you're that close to making a sale, but you're that close to missing the sale. If you modestly admit you were number one in the region last month and the month before, you have just fed your ego, and there'll be no sale. But if you want to make the sale, you lower your voice, you look the prospect right in the eye, and you say, well, you know, Mr. Prospect, I really appreciate that comment. And I'm going to take it as quite a compliment. But the truth is, there are many things which I don't have the answer for. As a matter of fact, that is the reason I'm so excited about selling the product, which is the answer to your problem. And that's what you really want, isn't it? Closes, selling, works in every single phase of our life. Several years ago, I was scheduled to speak in Greenville, South Carolina. I wrote the Holiday Inn for a room. I assumed I had it. When I walked into the lobby, I realized I was in trouble. There was a sign that clearly said, traveling men avoid Greenville, South Carolina the week of October 11th through the 15th. It's Textile Week. You cannot get a room within 50 miles of that town that week. Well, I knew I was in trouble, so I decided I'd walk up to the clerk and see what I could do. So I walked up and I said, I'm Zig Ziglar, would you please check my mail, please? The clerk was not impressed. She said, Mr. Ziglar, do you have a reservation here? I said, well, I sure hope so. And would you see if I've had any phone calls, please? She still is not impressed. She said, how long have you had your reservation? I said, oh, a long time. She said, how long? I said, well, I wrote about it a couple of weeks ago. She said, Mr. Ziglar, we book out from 1 year to the next. We literally have not had an opening in 1 year from last year at this big textile convention. I said, now, wait a minute, ma'am. And about that time, another lady walked out from behind the counter. The clerk I was talking to was obviously new, and with some relief, she turned to the other one. She said, this is Miss Fortune. I looked at her and grinned. I said, she doesn't look like misfortune to me. She looks like good news all the way. Well, bless her heart, she smiled very pleasantly, and she said, Mr. Ziglar, normally I am good news, but tonight. I said, just a minute, ma'am, don't say another word. I'd like to ask you 2 questions. She said, all right. I said, question number 1, I said, do you consider yourself to be an honest woman? She said, well, I certainly do. I said, question number 2, if the President of the United States were to walk through that door right there, right now, and come up here to this desk and say, I'd like a room, now tell me the truth, would you have one for him? She said, now, Mr. Ziglar, you know perfectly good and well, we'd have a room for the President of the United States. I said, ma'am, I believe you are an honest woman, and I'm here to tell you I am an honest man. You can absolutely take my word for it. The President of the United States is not going to come through that door. I said, I'll take his room. I give you my word of honor, I slept there that evening. I really did. On many occasions, salespeople come to me and say, you know, I can do everything but close. I mean, I know how to get prospects, I know how to set up appointments, I know how to handle objections, I can do everything but close. Well, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to sell. Because until you close, you're nothing but a conversationalist. Now, let's review closing. Selling is such a fine profession. Just because, in your opinion, you've got that sales order safe in your hot little hands doesn't mean your work is over. In fact, a lot remains to be done. The sale you've just made should mark the beginning of a long and fruitful relationship with your customers, one in which the customer regards you as a reliable expert in your area and someone with whom he will gladly do business again. One of the highest compliments any salesperson can receive is to have a prospect referred to him by a happy customer. You can help make this happen by consistently and conscientiously following up on all of your customers. For openers, once the sale is completed, send a note or make a call, thanking your client for his business, making sure he's happy with the product, and asking him whether he needs anything else. A short while later, contact him again and let him know the outcome of your calls to the referrals he gave you. This is important for 2 basic reasons. 1, he learns that you thought enough of his referrals to follow through on them, which also builds credibility for you, the salesperson. And 2, it gives you one more reason to maintain contact with him. Once a sale is made, don't be afraid to plow the same ground again with a new product. Just because a customer has recently made a purchase doesn't mean that he won't be interested in buying again. So don't be shy about going back with your new offer. The good news is that each and every salesperson has a veritable gold mine of potential new sales living around in his or her old files. I would suggest that you regularly make contact with your old customers to keep them happy, to sell them new additions to your product line, and to get new prospects. During our time together, we've looked at 5 ingredients needed to become a successful salesperson: prospecting, presentation, closing, and a follow-up, all grounded in the key to the sales process, a positive self-image. A lot is involved in building a sales career. I so vividly remember the story Elmer Wheeler tells about a trip he took a little south of the border. He was seated in a bar one evening when the bartender noticed that his hand had been cut and there was an infection, and so he said to him, "Man, you better soak this in some of this." And with that, he poured some tequila in a shot glass and squeezed some lemon in it. Now, the shot glass was filled with ice. Now, I'm certain that the medical profession would not exactly endorse the full treatment, though they certainly go along with soaking it, as the bartender suggested, and they certainly would say that the lemon had a certain astringent value. The old farmer would say the ice is the thing that reduced the swelling, and that's what common sense is all about. And of course, the poet would say that the juice of the maguey plant is what made the difference. But what we're all really saying with that is this: when you take a little common sense and some scientific knowledge and throw in a little poetic philosophy, and you'll get results. To build a sales career, you need to acquire the knowledge of the successful salespeople and sales managers. You need to weave in a poetic philosophy of life which says that you can have everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want. To the knowledge and poetic philosophy, add the common sense of an old farmer and know that you must work hard at seeing new prospects and servicing old customers. You have a moral obligation to work so hard at building your sales career that, as my friend John Nevin from Australia says, if anyone ever sees you coming and says, "Here comes a salesman," you won't let him down. And if you do all these things, I'll close as I always do by saying, I'll see you. And yes, I do mean you at the top.